Hello, this is Yvonne Galusha, and this is the second video for the VBA course. The purpose of this video is to introduce the VBA Editor that you use to write macros. So notice we're now using that Developer tab. You can come over here and click Visual Basic. Alternatively, you could have clicked Alt F11, the keyboard shortcut, to get here. So this is considered the VBA Editor. And let's just kind of discuss the main areas first. Right here we have what is known as the Project Explorer. And so you can see here I have Solver enabled, so that's where I'm getting this. And then this is my current workbook. And recall that I added some worksheets, so you're seeing each object represented here. We will have more here once we start writing some VBA code. And down here is what's known as the Properties pane. And so depending on what you have selected, you'll get changes. And sometimes you'll need to change some of the properties that are associated with that particular Excel object. This area is your work area, and this is where you're going to write the code. And it's also called the code window. So we're going to go ahead and just show you a first little macro. To begin with, you have to insert a module. So do that here, insert module. And if you expand it, will take up the whole area. And once we did that, we've got some of these functionalities enabled that were not enabled a second ago. They were grayed out. For now, I'm just going to tell you to type this at the beginning of your modules, and later on we'll talk about why, but you want to always put option explicit. Then a macro is another name, subroutine, or sub for short. So we will start a macro by typing the keyword sub. And then we give it a name. So this is going to be a very simple little macro, so we'll just call it temp name. And notice it automatically inserted for us the end of the subroutine. Indentation is a good idea. So you'll see that I do that sometimes, and it just makes your code more readable. The first thing we're going to do is create what is called a variable. So we use the keyword dim, which is short for dimension. Basically, you are dimensioning an area in memory to use to hold some information. So we're going to call that username, that location, and it is going to be a variable type string. Now, what just popped up there is called IntelliSense, and as I started typing, it tried to give me hints, help, what I wanted, and once it was selected, I just tabbed, and that inserted the rest for me. So the next thing I want to do is go ahead and put a value in that variable placeholder, and I'm going to do that via an input box control. So what will happen with the user is that a little dialog box will appear and it'll prompt them. So the next thing I'm going to type is going to be telling them, the user, what I want them to enter. Now, again, this is IntelliSense helping you, and this prompt is required. That's why it's bold. The other parameters that are square brackets, those are optional. And it's telling you it's expecting this as string. A string has to be in quotes, so we'll start it with a quote, and then I'm going to ask the user, what is your name? Question mark. I end the prompt, and then I need to end the input parameters by closing it. What this little command will do is cause an input box to display and prompt the user to enter their name. Then when they do so, it puts the value in this variable memory location. Next thing I want to do is just simply output the value back to the user. And I am going to do that with what's called a message box control. And again, you need a parameter as to what you want displayed, as well as some optional things. But I am just going to output the value that they entered. So I'm just going to type the variable name. And that is my little macro. So now we are ready to run it. I'm going to do that by clicking this little button here. You can see it says run the sub. And you can see here is the input box asking for input from the user. And there is the output message box. And it said OK. Once I said OK, it brought me back to the VBA editor. So now you've seen your very first macro. And just to review, I had to first insert a module. We wanted to put option explicit at the top of the module. And then we can now insert macros. Each macro is going to be its separate subroutine. We can call macros from another macro, so have multiple subroutines, and we can have multiple modules in a single workbook. So the last thing I want to do on this video is review some of these toolbars up here. I was using the standard toolbar. Oftentimes when you first open a VBA editor on a machine, these may not be displayed. So if that's the case, you want to come here, view toolbars, and then just be sure they are all checked. I found when I checked them on mine, they were not docked, so I just dragged the title bar area, the dialog box for the toolbar, and then docked it up here. I happen to have high resolution, so I'm able to put mine all linear. You may have to put them one on top of each other. Just depends on your resolution on your monitor. So the three common toolbars are the standard, and the standard toolbar, you can see you can save the workbook. And so I'm just going to go ahead and save it in my VBA folder, which I happen to enable for execution of macros in the first video. So I'm going to just create here a folder and call it macros. And what I want to emphasize is if I just save this as a workbook, which is the .xls file, the macros will be lost. You need to save it explicitly as a macro-enabled workbook if you want to keep those. Otherwise, you give it a name, whatever you want, and that means it gets saved with the extension XLSM. You'll see right up here, getName.xlsm, which if you're ever looking at your files, that tells you that it is macro enabled. Another way to note that it is macro enabled is, let me navigate down to where I just saved it under my VBA folder and macros folder. And you can't hardly see this. Again, my resolution is so small, but there's this little tiny exclamation point in the lower right hand corner. So that is what the icon looks like if it is macro enabled. So back to our VBA editor. We were using the standard toolbar to save. We've used it to run, and you can use it for some other things. One thing these allow you to do is to make certain things visible or not visible. These two, Project Explorer or the Properties pane, happen not to be visible, you can quickly just turn them back on here. So the other toolbar that I want to talk about here is the editing toolbar. So for example, you may want to outdent your code, or indent a block of code. See, I highlighted it, was able to indent. And this also enables some other capability, but I'm just kind of basically introducing it briefly today. But this is called the Edit toolbar, so you use that sometimes when you're writing code. And then this third toolbar is the debugging toolbar. So once you get where you're writing more complicated macros, this can be very handy. You may want to set a break on a certain line of code, and what that does then is it stops execution when it hits that place. So I'm not going to go too much into all this right now, but I did want to introduce those, and hopefully you found this helpful writing your first little macro. Thank you.